an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Ambassador's Mission, chapters 13, 14, and 15. The Trap, Unexpected Allies, and Late Night Visitors. In these chapters, Sania lobbies to get the rule about fraternizing with unsavory characters altered rather than completely abolished. Doesn't quite go the way she wanted. And more importantly, somebody tries to kill Lorkin. It's rough and unexpected. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. Ashleigh says she's several drinks in and doesn't think she'll have much useful to contribute today. Ashleigh, maybe I should have some drinks later on tonight. You know, it's St. Paddy's Day. I totally forgot. I put my green nails on yesterday in preparation for it, but other than that, totally forgot all about it. And you know, we're all sitting at home alone, trying to just make it through this weird period of history that we are now in. And I feel like having some CBD and a drink. You know what? I am due. I think I might do that. I have to record Avatar tonight, but nevertheless. Anyway, so welcome Ashleigh, and Martin is also in this chat. So this first chapter, 13, The Trap, really you would think this would be Late Night Visitors, would be the chapter where he gets attacked in the middle of the night would be called The Trap, but no. So chapter 13 begins with Sania, and this is an interesting moment here for me of like Sania asking herself what it was that if she were hypothetically going to forgive Regin for what he did to her, what would it take? Because the thing is, Sania's not trying to hold a grudge, right? She's not being petty. It's not that she doesn't recognize that Regin is a different person now. It's simply that she has trauma from a dude who tried more than one time, I may add, to literally kill her as a teenager, only because she was poor. Let's be frank. If she came from a different family, no problem at all. He would not have given a shit about her. Wouldn't have mattered. He might have had a rivalry with her still because she was very powerful. But she would not have drawn his attention. And she's sort of judging herself here at the fact that it's been 20 years and she still feels weird about going to his home. She still has a lot of trepidation about just colluding with him, I think is the word that she uses later when she thinks about it. She's like out here acting as if working with him to come up with an idea that will best serve all of the students is somehow nefarious simply by virtue of the fact that Regin is involved at all. And she knows she's being silly, but she just doesn't know how to move past this mentally. And that's the thing when you deal with trauma, rational thought does not play into it. It can with therapy, it can with time, but initially you're just dealing with a bunch of messy emotions and like lizard brain responses that are left over from when somebody fucked with you. And I am really not mad at her for that. I'm not holding it against her for still not trusting him. And I will be honest with you guys. I don't know if I even still think like Regin he does seem to have changed in a lot of ways, but there's a moment later where she's talking about like wondering when the cruelty will surface that she knows is in him. And that's really my question, is that it's not that I don't believe that people can change, because I really do. I know I am so different from the person I was only 5 years ago. My old self is in many ways unrecognizable to me. It's the kind of thing that I'll think back at, on things that happened to me and it feels like it happened to somebody else, because the way I coped with it or the way that I saw it at the time was so different. Now, though, there is, I feel that when you see somebody doing what Regin does in the previous book, I guess the book before, when he like comes at Sania and he's like really trying to beat her down with magic, there is, and she uses the word cruel, and I think that's a good word. There is a cruelty and malice there that I don't know if you can find that in everyone. What I'm saying is, I think that Regin can change as a person in terms of growing up, seeing better, his own mistakes, yada, yada, yada. But when you have that kind of capacity in you to begin with, to be that kind of cruel, to enjoy watching someone suffer and be in pain, to enjoy humiliating somebody, and not because they did something to you and you are enjoying watching them get their comeuppance. You are enjoying humiliation because you feel they don't deserve something and you believe you get to decide whether they deserve it or not. That kind of capacity isn't in everyone. I am not saying that I don't think everybody has the capacity to be a bad person, but there is a difference between being thoughtlessly shitty, being maybe just like inconsiderate, being lazy or taking people for granted or taking advantage at times. There is a difference between that and willful cruelty. And as much as I can say I have changed over the past 5 years, I don't think that there is a fundamental shift in what I believe is or is not cruel, like what's acceptable on that front. So while I believe that Regin can change his behavior and become a better person with better ideals and hold himself up to a higher standard, I understand Sania kind of being like, listen, I'm not saying that you can't be a better person, but I am saying, what kind of person is interested in doing what you did to begin with? Where did that come from? I don't believe that portion of who you are just goes away. And I can't help but agree with her on that. That is a very particular kind of sadism, really, that not everybody has. And I really, not trusting him after all of this makes total sense to me. And I will be honest, it has crossed my mind here and there that he might be the thief hunter, because I could see him now rethinking everything that he did in terms of the way that he treated her, but taking the wrong lesson from it. That's really like, does he seem to have some shame now about the way he behaved? Yes. But is that simply because he now realizes that while he hated Sania because she was poor and from the slums and that she had like come and become a part of a world that he didn't think she belonged in. Now maybe he realizes I was wrong because Sania's not like other poor people. She's one of the good ones, but maybe he still hates poor people. Maybe he's going out here and assassinating thieves because he really believes that they are at the root of what's going wrong with Rowett. Maybe he believes that there is still an inherent like inferiority to people who are poor. And it would suck. I want him to have changed to the point where she can trust him and genuinely like he has become a different person. But I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that he actually is finding an outlet for cruelty that is still present in his personality. And he has just found a different way to direct that energy, We'll see. I don't think that's exactly true because later on when we're with Sari, it seems that he has spotted the hunter and it seems that hunter is a woman. But we don't know that's the hunter for sure. We don't know anything. So I'm not willing to put any eggs in that basket at all at this time. So anyway, this whole thing of her thinking to herself about whether or not Regin made it up to her the way that he had said he would, whether she's being silly for still being wary, I just don't blame her for this at all. Not even a little. So she's like heading towards his house. And as she's, there's this moment here. A few men and women strolled the street. Their high status obvious from their clothing, and one magician. The rest were servants. But then she noticed a group of 4 men leaving a building at the end of the street and entering a carriage. Though they wore the finery of the rich, there was something about their stature and movements that brought to mind the confident brutality of street gangs. Now that's interesting. And I'm wondering if there is any Sari going on there. Because we don't exactly know where in the grand scheme he is at this moment. And I'm like, is Sari hiding out in there? It would actually be pretty funny because he's like trying to come and visit her later on in this, in these chapters. And it turns out that she's like not even in her rooms. And he's like, God damn it. It didn't even occur to me that she might not be home. So she goes into Regin's house and she meets his wife for the first time. Her name is Winina. And Winina is sort of like, it doesn't strike me that she's like a bad person. It seems like she is just a little awkward. Her greeting to Sania is, I've heard so much about you. It's not often we have a historical figure in our home. Sania tried to think of something appropriate to say in reply, but couldn't. The woman flushed, then put a hand to her mouth. Well, she said, you two have serious matters to discuss. I'll leave you be. And Regin tells Sania that his wife is very intimidated by her. And Sania's like, she didn't seem like she was. And he's like, trust me, she usually does not stop talking. So yes. So Sania comes because she's been thinking over what it was that Regin and her talked about the rules surrounding guild members being able to consort with unsavory characters. And for those who have forgotten, the issue here is that they're now allowing people into the guild who come from poor families. And many times their own mothers and fathers are unsavory characters. And yet the rules of the guild prevent them from being able to even go and visit their own families. And this is a very unfair standard. And so when we're talking about that at the outset, the idea of, oh yeah, let's do away with that rule seems completely reasonable. Like, yeah, it's an oppressive rule. The language is so vague. Sure, getting rid of it seems like a good idea. But then after Sania spoke to all of the other helpers that she had at her hospice, she begins to realize that rule has its reasons for being there and that it can potentially be pretty helpful. It's just probably needs to be clarified more, and maybe could even be ruled on a case-by-case basis. You know, I would be okay, for example, if I were somebody who was like, let's say in charge of admissions to the guild, if they have an admissions office, finding out who their family is and making an exception to the rule for specific people on a list who we know are their family. Now, I understand that being tricky, because what if you go and visit them and they have somebody over, or they ask somebody to come and see them while you're there and you get caught with them and they aren't on the list? But it's a better option than many, I feel like. So that could work. But the fact of the matter is, we have people getting involved in drugs, and she really thinks that rule is maybe one of the few things standing in the way of other novices starting to get addicted as well. So, you know, she talks about this with Regin here. And it says she had decided not to mention her suspicions about Rowett's potential permanently affecting magicians' bodies. When she had mentioned her suspicion to Lady Vinara, the woman had been politely disbelieving. It would take a lot more than one stoneworker's claims to convince magicians that they couldn't heal away the drug's effects. Until Sania had the time to test her theory, she would have to keep the idea to herself. And even if she did prove it, there were some in the guild who would blame the lower classes for the problem, and that would only worsen the situation the rule had put the lowies in. So, something that I've been thinking about since that chapter where she talked to the stoneworker, what if the drug is low-key magical? I don't know if that's a possibility. The thing about magic in this universe is that it is pretty straightforward a lot of the time. We haven't really come across too many specifically magical objects. We have like the rings that are the blood rings, you know. We have the store stone, but they're pretty few and far between. Mostly magic is a force that people use and work with, but infusing an object with it or a potion doesn't seem to be super common. So I'm not entirely certain if a magical drug is even possible with the way that magic works in this universe. However, it would be interesting because that would add a layer to what's happening here. So, you know, we'll see. So Regin is pretty interested in the fact that she has sort of changed her mind on this. And Sania says, like, you know, I do still think the rule is unfair to the lowies because family. And I do think that we need to do something to fix it because otherwise there's going to be a problem. We're going to start losing people, or we might invite rebellion. And Regin says, yes, I agree. And for quite opposite reasons, I feel we must ensure that those magicians charged with ensuring the rule is obeyed and punishing those who break it do so fairly and without favor. The rule must be changed, not abolished, Sania concluded. I agree. They regarded each other in expectant silence. Then Sania found herself smiling. Well, that was easier than I thought. He chuckled. Yes, now we face the hard part. How should the rule be changed? And how are we going to convince the higher magicians or the rest of the guilds to vote the way we want them to vote? So they start talking about different people and their interests in this and their personalities and the ways that they can handle them. So they bring, Regin brings up Lord Osen. I hope I'm saying that right. And he says that he thinks if both of us come at him with the same proposal, I think that, you know, if we do it separately and make it seem like we both come to this conclusion of our own thoughtfulness and not because we're like colluding with each other, I think that he will come around. And Regin says, I will do what I can to soften the stance of the opposed. We must explore the advantages and disadvantages of both possibilities thoroughly, so we are ready for all arguments raised against us. Sonia says, we need to consider a different approach according to who we need to convince, which is definitely, I mean, that's just how that shit works. And she says, and I think that if we go to the whole guild, that we'll be more likely to be able to get people to agree to change. If we just go to the higher magicians, they're pretty set in their ways. I think they're going to want to keep things as they are. So Regin says, I have some ideas about this. Can I go first? And I loved this. As he began to explain the changes he'd considered, Sonia could not help feeling a reluctant admiration for the careful thought he'd put into the problem. It was clear he'd been thinking about it for much longer than the few weeks the issue had been debated around the guild. Yet, unlike some of the women and men she had questioned, the solutions he was suggesting were practical and unbiased. Where is the arrogant, prejudiced snob that I knew as a novice? Is he simply better at hiding it now? So yeah, I like that. There's nothing quite like disliking a person, but realizing that they are actually kind of legit at the way they do things. It's a weird feeling to be like, man, I do not like you at all, but you are fucking pretty smart and good at this, you know? This is my problem, is that I tend to respect intellect maybe a little bit too much at times, because I have said it in so many different podcasts. I can forgive a character being kind of evil more than I can forgive a character being stupid. If somebody is like doing shit because they are just a bad person who doesn't care, I find that somehow easier to live with than somebody who does bad things because they are simply not fucking thinking things through or being careful, or, you know what I mean? Not maybe listening to the judgment of more experienced people around them. And I know that's a weakness of mine. That's probably bad, but, you know, there it is. So let me go to Lord Daniel's POV. Lorkin, sorry. And Lorkin is doing everything he can to get an idea from the slaves of how he should be behaving. And he's having a really hard time with getting a straight answer out of anybody. Like, he'll get an answer when he asks the question, but the answer is frequently just like the very bare basic. Like, if you ask somebody, so where are you from? And they just say such and such, and then you sit there and stare at them and they don't continue or volunteer any more information. That's what he keeps running into, is people are giving him the minimum that they are allowed to say while still technically answering his questions. And all he wants to know is how to fucking treat these people, the ways in which he might be unconsciously embarrassing himself, or that Daniel might be embarrassing himself, and just overall wants to understand the culture better and what other slaves expect as well from his behavior. And the problem is that these slaves can all be beaten if they make him angry, and they know that. So they are very worried about giving him a true answer, because they're afraid they're going to piss him off and then he's going to lose his temper on them. So he realizes that the one person that he thinks he could get the best answers out of is Tyvara. And he doesn't really know why she's the one that he wants to see. I figure he's drawn to her, that he has already the beginnings of a crush, and that's why. But he seems to think like maybe there's more of a thing there. So he asks them to bring her to his room, and it's very clear when she arrives that she thinks he has summoned her because he's finally changing his mind and wants to bed her. And he asks her to pour both of them some wine, and then finally she admits that she doesn't even like wine, and he feels like an idiot, which I found really funny. And he took another mouthful from his own glass, considering what to say next. Is there any way I should be behaving that I am neglecting or getting wrong? Is there anything that I could do to improve my interactions? And am I making a total fool of myself when interacting with slaves? The slightest hint of a smile touched her lips, then she shook her head once more. You hesitated then, he pointed out. There is something, isn't there? I'm not making a fool of myself, but instead I'm doing something unnecessary or silly, aren't I? And finally she says, you don't need to thank us. And it's the first time that he has heard her speak since this interaction. Like, otherwise she has just been like, head gestures, shaking head, nodding, whatever. Her melodic, husky voice was a revelation after all the silent gestures. He felt a shiver run down his spine. If she wasn't a slave, I think I'd find her immensely fascinating. And if she wasn't dressed in the awful wrap dress, probably quite attractive as well. But he hadn't called her here to romance her. No, you haven't, sir, but you got a crush. And what an unfortunate position to be in, where, like, if you have a crush on somebody who is a slave, good luck, good luck pursuing that without feeling like a total fucking creep. So he says, is there anything else? And she kind of freezes up, and he realizes that this is the way that she looks when she's afraid to tell him the truth because she thinks he's going to get mad. And he finally convinces her that she can tell him. And she says, you will lose status if you do not take a slave to bed. He felt a flash of shock, then of amusement. Questions flooded his mind. Did he and Daniel care about losing status for such a reason? Should they? But then, how damaging was their inaction? Had previous guild ambassadors and assistants bedded the slaves here? But more importantly, how would free Sachakans know if the new guild ambassador and his assistant bedded their slaves or not? Clearly, such information isn't kept secret. The slaves here are, after all, the Sachakan king's possessions. It would be stupid to think our prowess in the bedroom wasn't discussed and judged. It didn't even occur to me. They can, read minds. They can basically summon a slave and watch a porn. If they are, looking at the memories of a slave who slept with somebody, which is so endlessly fucked up. Oh my God. Can you imagine? First of all, you're getting raped initially because you are a slave being taken to bed. But then you get to be victimized again by some other fucking creep reading your mind and getting off on the memory of it. Ugh. Fucking double gross. So he asks, how much status will we lose? And she's like, dude, I don't quantify that shit. I can't tell you. All I know is that they won't respect you as much. And he keeps looking at her being like, man, if she wasn't a slave, I would definitely do her. I just can't do it though. This is too weird. So he says, yeah, you know what? I don't care. I'm not doing it. And she finally is like, it says she glanced up at him, an intense look in her eyes. He saw her teeth flash as they pressed against her lower lip. Then she grimaced. And he realizes, oh, fuck, and goes, what'll they do if I don't have sex with you? And she says they'll send someone else and another. And they will all be punished, her words seemed to hint. He bit back a curse. If they do, I will ask for you. If you want me to, of course. We will talk, tell each other about ourselves and our countries or something. I don't see how I'm going to learn about Sachaka otherwise. How does that sound? Will it work? And she nods finally. And he asks about her history, where she's from, what her family is like. And she tells him, and he just sort of sits back and listens to her. And Yeah, because I had really been like, why don't they just say he slept with her? If he's asking for her, if he's spending time with her, they could just say it. But no, they can't. Like, if there's the mind reading thing, yikes. So then we cut to Sari and Gol, and they are on the roof of the pawn shop looking down at Macon's like strong box that he is keeping the books in, the really valuable magical books. So remember, they have set up this like honeypot trap for the thief hunter. Let's see. After visiting the shop, pretending to view the book for the first time, and making sure Macon didn't sell it before Sari could return with the money for it, Sari had visited a few of the drinking establishments they patronized to boast about the special volume he'd be buying just as soon as someone paid their debt to him, which would probably be tomorrow. So this apparently winds up working pretty well. I have to admit a little bit of surprise at this. And he almost seems a little bit surprised as well, because he knows that this is kind of a long shot. So he is standing and waiting, like, you know, realizing for the first time how age is beginning to get to him. And man, that's got to be rough when you're a thief. And like so much of what you do depends on being nimble and getting in and out of like situations and being able to fight and yada, yada, yada. And he thinks about Savara and how she saved his life once before, this mysterious Sachakan woman. And I had been wondering what was going on with her. Apparently, like, you know, the two of them like hooked up, and that was the end of that, pretty much is what it seems like. And it says he'd also sensed that he'd not easily get rid of her, that it was better to keep her occupied thinking she was helping him without letting her get too close to the truth. She'd worked that one out pretty fast, and then there was the night when they'd watched Sania and Acheron fight and kill an Echani woman. The battle had caused the roof to collapse under them, but Savara had stopped him falling with magic, and then things had become much more personal. After the Echani invasion, she'd left, returning to the people she worked for. He'd never seen her again, though he'd often wondered where she was and if she was alive and safe. She would most likely have ventured into dangerous situations again and again for the sake of her people, so it was easily possible one had led to her death. So I'm wondering if she is part of this crew of women living out in the secret areas of the wasteland. Because the wasteland thing, it was set up like 700 years ago now, has it been? That they were living there when the Store Stone exploded. So it's still unclear to me whether they were in the territory that would have been damaged. Like, if all of those women were killed by the Store Stone, or if they were far enough away that they managed to escape that damage and they are still going strong with this like secret society that they've got set up. But maybe she worked for them, and maybe that is who Tiana, is that her name? The one that Lorkin is into. I think she might be with them as well. That'll be interesting. I'm curious if that's still a factor here. So he gets distracted from this line of thinking by Macon showing up with this woman. And this woman has a sort of, there's an interesting accent going on there. And also Sari notices that like her voice has this sort of huskiness that makes it sound like she's older, but the way that she moves, she's got like a real youthful quality to her. And he's having a hard time knowing exactly which of these to give more credence. And she wants Macon to open this safe. And he says that Sari took the key. That way I couldn't sell it to anyone else before they came back with the money. Which she does not buy, but it seems like Macon is telling the truth here. And Macon like kind of pulls away from her and cringes in this way that suggests that he knows she can do magic. Like, it's weird because she wants him to leave so that she can open the safe with magic. It's like she kind of doesn't want to do it in front of him. But it seems like he's quite aware that she's capable of this. So I don't know what the secret is exactly. And she opens it up finally. And Gull, like, this is the first time that Gull has really seemed to, like, listen to the fact that there is a magician involved. It seems like he really hasn't completely believed this theory that Sari had. And she goes in and looks through all of the books, and then she gets disgusted, kind of throws them down, doesn't seem to, like, she doesn't take anything. And she winds up just leaving. And she doesn't even, like, put the books back in the safe. She doesn't try and, like, make it seem like she didn't do this. And she doesn't take anything. It's a weird way to end it. But yeah, he says, if the guild captures this woman, they'll read her mind and find out once and for all if she is the killer. If she isn't, then there's nothing to tell Skellen. And if she was, once the guild found and dealt with the rogue, there'd be no thief hunter to worry about anymore. So he decides that he's not going to tell Skellen, and that he thinks he's going to go and tell Sania instead. And this leads to him going to see Sania and leaving a note for her. He just writes a little, he draws a little rat, because that's what Sari means, is the word in this universe for rats, and leaves that in her room, because she isn't home when he gets there. And I think that's the last we see of Sari in this section. So when we go to Daniel, he has been granted an audience with the king, which it turns out, I thought that was like part of the deal. I thought that if you are an ambassador, meeting with the king is just like going to happen. But evidently it's not necessarily going to happen. And there's a lot of delays that can happen. There's a lot of sort of mind games, I guess, and just like kind of playing with people's expectations. And so he has this like, he didn't even realize that he was playing it, but apparently Achadi thinks that he was. And Achadi says, your ploy of not nagging to see the king has worked. You've been granted an audience. To which Daniel's like, ploy? I wasn't doing anything. Should I have been nagging? And he's like, no, not really. I mean, if you didn't really need to see him, but the fact that you didn't even ask about it kind of got his attention and made him like interested. So you're going to be seeing him. And he talks about how like in Eileen, there was, an expectation that he go and see the king at once. And that was pretty much the only time that he ever saw the king, was after that first meeting to introduce himself. After that, the primary ambassador was the one that took care of things. And I had kind of forgotten, like in my memory, Daniel performed much the same function for that ambassador that Lorkin is performing for him now. But that's not true. Lorkin's his assistant, and he was an actual ambassador in his own right. He was simply a second. So I keep thinking about him as, being in a similar situation, and he's not really, and plus Kyrillia just has a lot more going on with Eileen in terms of like trade and overall relations. They don't have the same checkered past between each other. And so they have a lot more to do, in terms of their, the ambassador work. So it requires two people. Whereas here in T'Chaka, it's just not really necessary. So he goes to see the king. The palace that the king lives in is over 1,000 years old and is really, really beautiful. It's just sort of one of those things that really makes an impression on him. And he notices when he first meets the king that the clothing the dude wears looks really, really uncomfortable. And the throne he's sitting on even seems uncomfortable. And it looks like the guy like wants to get up right away. And Daniel kneels, and the dude does immediately get up out of his chair and come and introduce himself, and then offers to show him around the palace. And it's an interesting architectural detail that the walls are not straight. It's not like the way in your average home nowadays, where everything is like right 90-degree angles and straight lines. Everything is sort of like sinuous is the word that's used a couple of times. Organic. It's not, there's not a pattern and a rhythm to it. So Daniel starts to get really disoriented, and he wonders whether or not that's like the point, is that way, unless you get to know things really well, you can't just like come in and follow somebody's instructions. The king is sleeping in the third room on the left on the second corridor, and just go find him and kill him. It may be that this is constructed this way in order to make it safer in its way. So he starts talking about the history that he's trying to fill in and the Store Stone and all of that. And he talks about how people have said in their histories that Imardine was leveled, and the king is like, what? No, of course it wasn't. And Daniel's like, I mean, you say that, but it could have been destroyed even though we won that final battle. It doesn't mean that it wasn't destroyed. And the king's like, I don't know what to tell you. That's not in our records at all. I mean, granted, few Sechakans survived that. So maybe, but I don't think that they would have done that. And Daniel talks about how maps and buildings, there are no buildings older than 400 years, and the few maps we have from before the Sechakan War show an entirely different street plan. 400 years. So the Store Stone thing, that was 700 years ago, right? So something happened much more recently, I guess. So that's interesting and unrelated to the Store Stone, I guess. So they're talking about the Store Stone. The king says something about how probably, because he mentions that records from that time were destroyed. And we know, that 400 years ago, I guess, was that was the black magician that kind of went on a rampage, right? So that's why some of the records were destroyed, because they wanted to get rid of the black magic, like, instruction manual, essentially. Can he have used black magic to, like, level people's homes? I mean, of course he could have. Why would he, is really the question. Interesting. So the suggestion the king has is maybe the records weren't destroyed. Maybe they were moved. And Daniel's like, I guess that's possible, actually. But yeah, I'm surprised Karelian history is so muddled, but we have gaps in our history as well. And then he brings Daniel to see the column where we know, I'm pretty sure, the Store Stone was kept. And he mentions that to the king. And I was kind of surprised. Like, again, I keep being taken aback by how open everyone is being with one another in this book, because I just keep seeing them as enemies, and it's not necessarily the case anymore. But yeah, he says that they have lore that there was a Store Stone that was taken by a guild magician, and and then offers to bring Daniel to see the library. And then we go back to Sania. I'm running out of time here. I only have 15 minutes left. I'm gonna kind of speed through. I found the vote thing a little bit boring, to be honest. I didn't really care that much about this. So in the end, they vote to alter the rule, but they don't alter it in the way that she had wanted. And there's one particular magician named Lord Tilano who seems particularly averse to treating Rowett like it's dangerous, which makes me feel that either he is using or he is selling. There's something about how cavalier he is about it that feels really forced, and like he's trying to behave as if he doesn't have a dog in this fight, but he definitely does. And Venara actually stands up and says that Rowett does way more harm than just booze, because he tries to compare it to that. And when he's like, well, how do you know? She says, maybe you could come to the fucking hospice that we have set up and you would understand, because we get a pretty good look at what the fuck is happening there. And Sonia is surprised because it was Venara that seemed to not really buy into her theory of how Roa affects magicians. And she wonders if, like, since they talked, Venara went and saw and has begun to realize that Sonia might have a point. So finally, they take their vote. Those in favor of abolition change your light to blue. Eventually, they have the light vote. So my count agrees with Lord Talano's. The vote is cast. We will change the rule so that it forbids magicians, quote, to be involved in or benefit from criminal activity. Her expression matched what she felt. Surprise, perplexity. They chose an option introduced at the last moment which changed the rule completely, which both weakened and yet narrowed the focus of it. Magicians and novices can no longer be punished for indulging themselves in pleasure houses because they're no longer forbidden to associate with criminals. But at least they can't be lured into criminal activity, which is what the rule was meant to prevent in the first place. So this is the problem. Like, it's the rule has been altered to be more effective for what it was initially meant to do. But her concern is people getting involved in using Rowit. And it seems as if now that's going to be all the more easy. And that's the exact opposite of the result that she wanted. So, yikes. We'll see. So, we go to Lorkin. This is so funny, guys. He's dreaming that he has the Store Stone and that it disappears. He's in the middle of this dream. And then all of a sudden he's like, wow, what is that? Oh, that feels really nice. Wait, is that? Oh. And it says, he felt very good, as if the sheets on his bed were moving across his skin and getting rather personal in a nice way, with parts of him that suddenly he was wide awake. And someone else was there, very, very close to him, crouched on top of him. Smooth skin brushed against his. A pleasant scent filled his nostrils. The sound of breathing caressed his ear. He could see nothing. It was utterly dark, but the sound of breathing was somehow recognizable as coming from a woman's throat. Tyvara. He assumes, because he wants to assume, that it's Tyvara. He could feel that she was naked, and she now let her weight settle onto his body. And at first he's like, I should push her off. But then she just inserts him. And he's like, wait, what? And like, he can't stop himself. He's like, no, this is really good though. And it seems like she wants this to happen. And I'll be honest, he's awake enough here that in the end, this is consensual. He had the opportunity to stop her and he doesn't. But let the record show that this was very close to straight up rape. And it bothered me a little bit when Tyvara is talking to him afterwards and how she says, like, didn't look like you were doing much to stop her. I'm like, bitch, this woman would have been like putting his dick in her if he was awake or not. This is not something that you should hold against him. Come on. And he winds up saying that he wasn't even completely awake yet, which we know isn't exactly true, but I understand why he told that little white lie. And she's like riding him, and he's basically like, all right, this is happening. I think I'm gonna, just ride this one out, pun intended. And she stops moving, and he thinks that this means that she is about to come, and he's like smiling to himself. And she gives a cry, but there's like the sound of something obscuring her mouth. And he's sort of like, what is that? And then all of a sudden, the light comes on in the room. And he sees that the woman on top of him is a complete stranger. And Tyvara has her hand over this woman's mouth. And he looks down and sees that there is blood running down her side. So I think Tyvara, does she try to draw magic from this woman? Is that how she kills her? I can't remember. And the woman says to Tyvara, he has to die. You're a traitor to your people. And Tyvara's like, bitch, I told you I wasn't going to let you do this. So I don't know why you're fucking surprised. I said I would stop you. Oh, look, here I am. What a shock. You dumb. I warned you. You had the chance to walk away. You didn't walk away. Not my fucking problem. And Lorkin, for his part, is still just like not getting what the fuck is happening. Stark ass naked. He was like on the edge of coming. And now there's a woman like murdered on the floor. Tyvara, who he thought he was fucking, is standing there like judging the shit out of him right now. It's just a bad scene for him. I felt for him, honestly. He's just like, what is happening? I thought this was a really good moment in my life, and it turns out everything is terrible. And he thinks initially that Tyvara is mad, which I'm just like, dude, what? Why don't you believe the words that she is saying to you? What are you even doubting her for? And Tyvara's like, oh, I see. She was fucking you. And you don't see why she would have done that if she was trying to kill you, because you don't understand that is one of the like big ways of taking a ton of magic. Sachakan men know of Lover's death and are wary of it, but they don't know how to do it. They used to, apparently, but lost the knowledge when they stopped teaching women magic. You're a woman, Lorkin pointed out, so how is it you know magic? She smiled. Men stopped teaching women magic. Women, however, did not. So, as they're talking, he manages to sneak the bloodstone ring into his pocket and pretty much seems to be under the impression that as long as he has that and can get in touch with his mother using it, he's going to be okay. Which I guess makes sense. It's basically like, as long as I've got my fucking phone and it's charged up and we're good to go, it's probably going to be fine. How bad can it be? I have a way to call 911. I have a way to get in touch with somebody. Probably that's all I need. So he asks her who she is, and she says that she's a spy, that she can't tell him who sent her, but that he has to come with her because if they realize that this woman failed to assassinate him, they will send another person and they will figure out that Tyvara was the one who stopped her and they will kill Tyvara also. And that this is when she says, I thought you were safe because you told me you weren't intending to bed any slaves. I should not have believed you. And he's like, I didn't mean to. And she's like, oh, really? And he's like, I thought she was. And then he stops himself and she's like, thought she was what? And he's like, I don't know. Somebody else. I was dreaming. Whatever. I'm just like, oh, you like her. Well, she's a slave. She's not a slave anymore now. She's a spy. So you can fuck a spy. No problem. So he asks, well, if I run, what about Daniel? Because he's still out here in these streets with no protection. Like, what happens to him? And she's like, oh, they're not fucking worried about Daniel. He's just an ambassador. You're the son of the man who crossed them. So you're the one that we need to be worried about. And he's just like, wow, okay. So mom was right after all. To which I'm like, when are y'all going to listen to Sania? Nobody ever wants to fucking listen to Sania. Christ's sake. All these books is, why didn't they listen to the women? So finally they take off. They leave this woman's corpse on the floor. And she promises to explain to him later, but she says that there is not time for that right now. And then we go back to Sari's POV, but I pretty much like went over this already. Then we have Daniel coming home and all of the slaves are in a fucking tizzy because they have to explain So, like, we're supposed to low-key be also security, but your bud's gone, and there's a dead woman on the floor in his room? Sorry, we don't know where he is. We don't know who she is. We don't know what happened. It's real bad. And poor Daniel is just like, I mean, he promised Sania that he was going to try and keep her kids safe, and then, like, look at this. He spectacular failure, man. Woof. And he says, he tells everybody to just get back to what they're doing, but he calls one particular dude to talk to him about it. And has this guy bring him to Lorkin's room. And he sees this woman, and he sees the wound, and touches her and can sense that all of the power was pulled out of her, and that this was black magic, which means that Lorkin isn't the one who killed her, which is at least like some comfort, you know? And when he asks if anybody else is missing, the man says Tyvara, and that she was like Riva, a serving slave. So apparently this woman who's dead was named Riva. And Daniel wants to know if these two women knew each other, if there's any connection to them. And the guy's like, well, I can go around and ask. And Daniel's like, no, you know what? And he thinks to himself that he should probably send a message to Ashaki Achadi right away. But then he's like, I don't know, though, because they might not tell me all of the information. And I want to know what the fuck is going on. So I'm going to line these slaves up. I'm going to tell them that they are not allowed to speak. And that way they can't like discuss things with each other and try and get their story straight. And then I am going to mind read each and every one of them and find out exactly what the hell happened. And it says, is it a coincidence that I was finally invited to the palace the night one of the king's slaves was murdered here? And that's a good question that didn't even occur to me, is that maybe this whole thing was like a big setup, you know? I don't think so, because this doesn't feel like the king was responsible for it. But I've been saying this whole time that I'm surprised at the openness between the Sachakans and the Curalians, and maybe the king took exception to Lorkin, of all people, being the assistant that Daniel brought with him. And maybe the king did organize this, you know? I don't know. But yeah, he basically tells himself that he's not going to say a word to Sania until he finds Lorkin, because otherwise he has to sit here and like deal with her being all anxious and worrying when he's pretty confident Lorkin is still alive. And he's just like, I'll just wait until I find Lorkin, and then I'll tell her everything after the fact, so there won't be anything to worry about left. It'll be taken care of. And the chapter ends with him basically like settling down to question all of these slaves and being like, God damn it, I thought I was going to get to like theorize about the Store Stone and spend all night researching and reading, and instead I got to deal with this bullshit, and this sucks. And that is the end of part 1. So that felt like a good stopping point to me. That was like 46 pages or so. So yeah, that is the end. Oh, and I'm exactly an hour, so that's really good timing. All right. Well, thank you guys very much for coming and hanging out with me. Thank you to Ashleigh. She says the whole death by orgasm idea is both hilarious and so fucking weird. Yeah, definitely. Makes sense. I could see it. But yeah, thank you, Ashleigh, for commissioning this. And there is another episode tomorrow morning. So I'm going to be rereading. I'll be reading again very shortly. And I think there's even another episode on Friday. Lots of them close together. So that's fun. I always enjoy when that happens. All right, everybody. Well, thank you again so much. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will be seeing you all again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.